Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Josh Vickers, and I am with the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence here at RTI International. This is the second webinar of our ASCLD series entitled Digital Forensics, an overview of for the laboratory manager. And before we get started introducing our speakers today, I'd like to hand things over to Tim Scanlon for a quick word.
Welcome everyone to the class. If you were here last week, you heard from me once already. My name is Tim Scanlon. This week I'm doing a dual role as a presenter and representing ASCLD. I am on the board of directors for ASCLD and the chair of the Training and Education Committee. And on behalf of ASCLD, I want to thank all you for being here today. We have a great series. This is the second time we've done this. Chris Dieters, who's with us as a moderator today as well, actually was her brainchild that I just kind of carried on. It was a great idea, just kind of an overview for directors. After this week, we'll also have one on fire debris, one on trace, and one on quality assurance. So if you're a digital forensics person, please tell other people in your organization about it, and thank you for attending.
All right, thank you, Tim. So the first thing we'll do is we'll introduce Tim Scanlon. He is currently the Chief Deputy with the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office in Louisiana, where he oversees the Technical Services Bureau, which includes the Laboratory Services Division, Communications Division, and Community Relations. In this capacity, he developed and expanded the Jefferson Parish's Sheriff's Office Digital Forensics Unit. Additionally, he is a court-qualified expert in several disciplines and has testified in numerous criminal trials in multiple jurisdictions. He obtained a Master's of Science in Forensic Science degree from Florida International University, where his graduate research focused on the corrosive effect of blood on projectiles. And then he earned his doctorate degree in public policy and administration from Walden University with a specialization in Homeland Security policy and coordination. Our second presenter of the day is Mr. Stephen Valeri. He's currently the Digital Forensics Unit Supervisor for the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office Crime Laboratory Digital Forensics Unit. During the beginning of his law enforcement career, he was a crime scene technician with the New Orleans Police Department Crime Laboratory. During this time, he was the primary technician on 25 homicide investigations. He earned his Bachelor's of Applied Science degree in Computer Information Science from Loyola University of New Orleans, and he is also a member of the International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists and a Certified Computer Forensic Examiner, the most recognized and respected certification in the field of digital forensics. He is also currently serves as the United States Southeast Regional Manager for the IACIS peer review phase of the CFCE process, which he now oversees 40 different coaches. Just a quick disclaimer, the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand things over to our two presenters today, our first being Mr. Tim Scanlon.
Hello again, everyone. We have a lot of material to go through, so I'm just going to jump right in. My goal for today is to touch base kind of on the commander's view of digital forensics, and then I'm going to hand it over to Steve Villery, who's going to get more into the weeds of what we do within our lab, some tips and tricks and things like that. The biggest thing for me is we're going to talk a little about the differences, the similarities. Let me interrupt. If someone probably should maybe need to mute their phone if you're doing it as a group, because we can hear over the phone. So just a quick reminder. Okay, so I'm just going to go on. Steve's going to provide an overview of the discipline and kind of talk about some of the future of digital forensics and some of the things that we've done and seen other labs do to kind of help streamline the process and kind of integrate things into our laboratory services. So just to give a real quick, brief overview of what computer forensics is or digital forensics is, a lot of people still refer to it as computer forensics, but basically it is the application of science to identification, collection, examination, analysis of data, while, like we do with all evidence, preserving the integrity of the information. Over the years, people think even more of just cell phones. Please keep in mind that you can do just cell phones, but computer forensics is a big field. Digital forensics is a big field moving forward. And one thing I'm going to spend some time talking about is that this section may not be comprised of the typical, quote, crime lab personnel. So if you have a digital forensics unit, if you're trying to take one on from maybe the law enforcement side, or if you're trying to tweak yours, what I'd like to do is just kind of give a couple examples of how they can be structured and how you can tweak it to make it work best in your situation. One way you can do it, obviously, is to have it within the crime laboratory and have them meet all the accreditation standards of everyone else in the crime laboratory. You can have it associated with the crime laboratory, and that's kind of how we have it in our department, where our digital forensics unit is part of what we call our laboratory services division. So it's very closely associated with the crime lab, but it's not actually under that org structure. In some agencies, obviously, everything's collected by the investigators and it's controlled by the detectives. So you can have that as well, and you might have that in your agency and are trying to make it more a part of the crime lab. So that's something we'll talk about. And in a lot of cases, you have a combination. Although ours is associated with the crime lab, we also have a combination of, we have people that we've trained in the Bureau to kind of help us do some work. Your type of personnel can vary greatly, and there's no right way to do it. It's just things to consider. So you can have strictly law enforcement personnel. I'll tell you that in our lab, we have computer scientists, but they're also detectives. So they have a detective mindset, and they have the training and education of people who are experts in digital forensics. You can have purely civilian personnel. There are some issues dealing with those too when you deal with things like child pornography and some things like that. But either system works, and you can have a combination where you have some law enforcement and some civilian. It just depends on how you want to set it up. The big thing I want to stress, and this is for your bosses, is I always joke with the digital forensics unit that they're Geek Squad. Well, they hate that because they're not Geek Squad. It's really funny that when I talk to people across the country, is that your chiefs, your supervisors think that anybody in your IT division can do digital forensics. Well, that's wrong, right? They're specialized to do what they do. Not anybody who knows computers can do digital forensics. So, and you shouldn't be pulling your digital forensics guys to go help, your administrative assistant with Word. They should stick to what they do within the laboratory. One thing we've noticed over the years and being a part of some different groups that we've recognized is digital forensics is in a funny place. And not many areas of forensic science really can say this. It has similarities to early latent prints and similarities with DNA and how it's structured. And some of the ways it follows the early latent prints, and something we have to overcome, is little things like latent print examiners typically started off with a law enforcement background. And then crime labs began to get more involved with latent print processing and identification and bring them more into the fold of accreditation and certifications and things like that. So there was some resistance there. Digital forensics is the same way. You may have a detective bureau who's used to having detectives do digital forensics, so they're going to be a little bit more resistant to coming into the lab and listening to accreditation standards and things of that nature. They're also not your typical analyst. We as crime lab directors are used to dealing with biologists and chemists. These people, if their training and education is going to be in computer sciences, so some of the things that we talk to personality-wise that a chemist and a biologist will understand easily, we may have to handle a little bit differently with the computer guys and just understand that it's just a different mindset between that law enforcement background and everything that they've trained in computers. And then lastly, much like latent prints in the old days, everybody thought they could dust for prints. Everybody thought it was a very simple thing to do. Everyone is an expert in digital forensics. We've had administrators come to us and say, well, why does it take 18 hours to download that phone? I went to the Apple store the other day and they changed me out in half an hour. It's different, but everyone thinks they're an expert because everyone owns a phone and everyone uses a computer. So it's another thing we have to deal with, and that's an educational thing that as a supervisor we have to kind of work through. And I recommend teaching classes and doing things like that. In addition to being like latent prints, it's also like DNA in that it is the hot topic. Whenever I give lectures on this, I always say digital forensics is the new DNA. It is the new thing everybody wants. Everyone has a cell phone everywhere they go now. Everyone deals with computers. We have huge backlogs, just like DNA does. There's a lot of similarities there. It's expensive. The equipment's expensive. It's not, it's not real cheap, and it's an evolving discipline. What was state of the art a year ago in DNA is not state of the art today. What was state of the art 6 months ago in digital forensics is not state of the art today. So it has similarities in both that latent print section and DNA, and if you kind of think of it that way as you're molding your section, how do I cope with both? It'll help you kind of work through your workflow and your structure. So that moves us to workflow and how we do our analysis. One big decision that we have to make in this field is we're going to use technicians or analysts. And it comes up quite often, how much analysis is our digital forensics group going to be? We typically do more analysis in digital forensics and train others to be the technicians. But you can have a hybrid system where you have some technicians and some analysts. You just keep them both in mind. Understand the two are very different. The analysts have the more training. They're going to go deep dive into the computers, and they're going to know more of the analytical side. Technicians can do more of the front-end work and things like that. And then what level are you going to be involved in a case? Are you going to go send guys out to the field to search warrants, to do on-scene previews? Are you going to train the law enforcement side to do that? Both systems work. You just have to come up with a plan of how you're going to do it. Is your digital forensics guys only going to be in the lab themselves, or are you going to have a hybrid? So both systems work very well. Another aspect of this is what type of analysis are they going to do? And my recommendation is to pick one field, one aspect, say cell phones, and start with the mobile phones, get all the tools and equipment they need for that, and then build. But it could be everything. It could be video, mobile phones, computers, vehicle forensics, smart homes. All these different things now have a role, and the more we automate our lives through computers, the more digital forensics is going to play a role in cases. Be careful with this, though, because if you have an administrator above you, they're going to say, oh, you have a digital forensics unit. They can collect all video in every case. Well, if your guys are out collecting video, they're going to have a tough time doing the analysis. So make sure you educate them about what each step takes and what you might have to train people outside the unit to assist you with. Steve and I always joke about this, and he's not a huge fan of this analogy, but I get to go first, so I'm using it. When we talk about what they're going to do, what's the role of your digital forensics unit, the way I look at it is a computer or a cell phone is a file cabinet. What do you want your guys to do in digital forensics? Do you want them to go through the file cabinet and find everything? Or do you want them to merely, like the first case, you see it's an unlocked file cabinet. Sometimes you get a phone that's unlocked. Sometimes you get a computer that's unlocked, where all they're doing is parsing out the data and they're making it readable for the detectives. They're writing reports and basically translating all the computer stuff into a nice report form. That's a role. Then a lot of times they'll get something that's locked, right? The phone will be locked. Their goal is to break into it if they can and then extract as much data as they can from there. And then lastly, within a computer or within a phone, you may have apps, you may have file systems, you may have files that are encrypted or locked. So do you want your people to actually go through the data or merely organize and unlock the data? And that has a lot to do with your workflow. In my opinion, I think their main focus is to unlock the file cabinet and let the guys put the puzzle pieces together. They should do the technical work of getting into it and do the analytical stuff, and then let the detectives on ways that works well, that he's set up in our laboratory to help with that. Like I said all along, education is the key. Your digital forensics unit needs to be educated, and it costs money for continuous education. It's an evolving field. But they also have to be educated in how digital forensics plays a role within the crime lab. DNA, fingerprints, all these different things that they might need to know, to work with. Also, your DNA and your fingerprint people and other aspects of the lab need to understand digital forensics so they know if they have something. They know how to process things, not to mess up any computer analysis. And they need expert witness testimony training as well. Just because these guys have testified as detectives doesn't mean they're going to be great expert witnesses. So please incorporate expert witness testimony training and understand that they are experts in the field. And then we have to educate our law enforcement, our prosecutors, our defense, and the court. There's a lot of myths out there, so kind of separating what they can do, myth versus reality, how to triage. The biggest thing we have, just like DNA, is an overabundance of evidence coming in, and most people can't keep up with it. So how are you going to make a workflow process to triage those cases? Getting the most from the evidence collected is a big thing, and Steve's going to talk about that. And yes, it does mean more work for us as administrators and the digital forensics unit to do this education, but in the long run, it's going to cut down on what we have to do case-wise and give a better product out for the investigation. The biggest thing is experts have opinions outside of trial. So make sure that your digital forensics guys are involved in the case put together before the court, right? Make sure that the people come to them and have that open door policy where they can offer an opinion and kind of help go through the cases with the detectives. If they do that, you have a much better workflow. Last couple things, I'll turn it over to Steve, is one good thing that I've seen labs do, and it's just a recommendation or something to consider, is if you have document examiners, we've noticed that as digital forensics increases, document examinations kind of waning off in some areas, and I've noticed some agencies have combined those two units, and it seems like a pretty decent fit. And understand that the types of crimes have changed. It used to be economic crimes, and child pornography and exploitation. We are finding more and more cases now with violent crimes, property crimes, contraband, things like that, where digital forensics is playing a role. So it takes greater education to maybe the global agency you work for instead of just those one or two units you're used to working with in the past. And without anything else, I'm going to turn it over to Steve. He's going to talk about some ways to improve workflow, some ways we thought outside of the box here, and just ways to be forward-thinking. So thank you for your time, and I'll be around for questions after Steve.
Hello, how's everybody doing today? So I'm going to go through a lot of slides, so I'm going to get right to it, start flipping through these. The first thing I want to do before I get into any details is I'm actually going to show some examples of digital forensic cases and talk about them as we go through those slides. So first example we have are skimming cases. So in skimming cases, you may note that there are some typical devices you see here, a laptop, cell phone, but then there might not be some so typical devices there, like an encoder decoder. You also take note, also in that same scene, we'll have devices like this, where these are actual skimming overlays that will go onto an ATM. These will contain some kind of memory that we can pull information off of and do analysis with. Also right here, note this is going to be a trim that goes onto an overlay for an ATM. Let me go to the next slide here. We'll zoom in a little bit here. You can see it a little better. It's actually being charged while it was in this location on scene. And we zoom into this trim here. You can actually see a micro SD card. So a micro SD card in this case contained the videos that were being taken by a little pinhole camera while you were putting your pin in on that ATM. These are some example parts that they were ordering that actually were being ordered for fix or repair, and then they would take those parts and actually turn them into those skimming overlay devices. This is a different case, but in this case, it was actually a gas pump, and the trim that we're looking at here is from the back side. So it was actually stuck up on the top of a gas pump. On that gas pump, they used electrical tape, and in the process of making this, we had to be aware that we may have another discipline here that we need to be conscious of. So in this case, it was latents. In this case, they actually left prints on the tape. So we were able to work with our latent print section and make sure that we didn't damage those latent prints during the process of these electronic devices that were seized. Here's a quick overview of the actual latents in that case. And then the next slide here is going to be a similar case to that, but they used, notice right here, is duct tape. Right? So this is a large battery that was wrapped in duct tape. During the process of making this, they, of course, did not use gloves. So when we unwrapped the duct tape, we were able to actually pull off latent prints, and we worked with our latent print section so that they could utilize those prints to make a match. The other device you saw in the pictures is going to be a little electronic circuit board with no printing on it that told us where this device came from. So one of the things we had to do from our side was we needed to figure out where this device may have come from. So by using the different ports and connections on that board, we were able to determine that it most likely came from a pair of glasses that is produced and sold on the internet that is used for recording from those glasses. And what they did in this case was they unwrapped the plastic from that, and then they put those circuit board inside of that trim overlay so they can make videos through the little pinhole camera slot that was on the overlay. Next case example is actually from a double homicide. In this case, it's a little different than actually taking like a micro SD card from a different device out and analyzing that information. In this case, we extracted information from a phone. The extracted graphics from that phone were used, and we thought in a different way to utilize that information. So in this case, this is from the suspect one's phone, and he has got a picture of a firearm here, and he also has a great high-resolution picture of part of his finger. So if we zoomed in on that, we can actually start to see some of the ridge detail here. In this case, we actually worked with our latent prints examiners again, and they were able to take the suspects that were in this case and involved in this case, and they were actually able to hold their hand in the same manner so that they could compare the graphic from the phone to the physical person's finger that they had as a known individual. And so they could make a comparison and make a match on whose finger this was in the picture. Because, of course, they would not say that this was them holding this right by their firearm. Same case, but on a different phone. There was a firearm used in that case. There were projectiles and cartridges that were seized from the scene. We actually were able to see the firearm serial number from a graphic that was on the phone. We did not have the firearm. In this case, we were able to zoom in with the high resolution and grab the serial number off of that firearm. With that information, they were actually to do some investigating further and look into where this gun was stolen from. And they were actually able to find test fires that had been taken from years before from previous owners, and they were actually able to do a match from the cartridges that were on scene and the old test fires without even having the firearm. Next one we'll go through real quick is a production of child exploitation case. In this case, there's going to be a mobile phone and a laptop. So we have a Samsung Boost mobile phone here. This was the first evidence item that was seized for this case. Inside the phone was a micro SD card. And on that micro SD card was graphics and videos that were actually extracted from the micro SD card, and we analyzed those graphics and videos to determine whether they were, one, taken with this cell phone, and if they were transferred to the laptop that was later seized. So here's the laptop. We're taking the hard drive out of the laptop here so that we could preserve that evidence and analyze it against what was extracted from the micro SD card from the phone. In this case, we actually had to create a presentation for court purposes, and we had to teach them in the courtroom a little bit about that digital forensics that was used in this case to show the totality of information. So we actually talked to them a little bit about how photographs are created and turned into digital information. During that process, we also had to talk about dates and times. So dates and times become a really big issue in digital forensics, and it can get confusing very quickly. So in this case, we had to talk about how the cell phone captured the graphic in -6 or -5 UTC time, right, because of the time zone where we are located in Central Time. We also had to talk about the generation of the file names. So when you take a picture with your phone, you're not usually creating that graphic and then naming it on your phone. The phone is using a scheme or a template to name those files every time you take a picture or a video. Well, in this case, on this particular phone, it was using a certain scheme. We broke that scheme down for them and told them about the date and time that was actually inside the name of the file, which would then be consistent later with other dates and times we had for those files. This is going to be metadata from inside of the graphics or graphics that were on the phone, and this data was actually something that we had to use, and it was very useful for the case. It actually showed us that it was taken with the same make and model as the phone we had seized from the suspect. It also had inside of it what was called GPS time and GPS date. That GPS time and date was consistent with the file name that was generated of when that video or that graphic was captured on the device. This is some more information, some of the information you just saw before, but it's actually using one of the tools that we use, and we actually broke down the information from the file that was transferred to the laptop. So in this case, we were actually able to show, using the dates and times that were consistent with the information that came from the micro SD card and what was located on the laptop, to show when this graphic was captured, which also was a date and time that the suspect was able to be at the residence, and information in trial unfolded in reference to that. The other interesting aspect of this case was that the graphics had a lot more metadata than the videos did. But using the totality of information related to the graphics and how that information was stored and generated, we could apply that same logic to the videos to show that it was consistent with this video being taken or created on that same or that date of July 24th, which was also consistent with him being at the residence. So that was a quick case overview. I hope everybody enjoyed that, and if that sparked anybody's interest, that was the idea for those slides. We're going to go over the process as a whole. This is real quick. Identify, collect, preserve, analyze. We added a new step in here. We call it review because we'll talk about a couple things in a few minutes. Where reviewing information, the amount of information we have to review, and that communication between the analyst and the requester or the detective or the investigator needs to be a two-way street, and it may need to be a two-way street during that analysis in order to find the information that they're looking for or that may be located on those devices that is actually related to the case at hand. So the roles here are an investigative role or investigative functions, and an analyst or an analysis, and doing your examination. So we try to separate those roles as best we can. Some parts of the overall process will merge these. Depends on how you are utilizing some of the skills that you have or the resources that you have. So when we're identifying things in digital forensics, mobile phones is really where it's at right now. Everybody has one, and they're essentially a computer in your pocket. So one of the most drastic changes that we've seen in this industry over the last few years is that smartphones are in everyone's pocket. Laptops were not in everybody's pocket. So 10 years ago when you were seizing devices, you may not get a laptop off of every person involved in a crime. Now, anybody involved in that crime, whether they're suspect, victim, or witness, or you have multiple of each, will have some kind of smartphone, and there is potential there for digital evidence. These are some typical devices that you may see and digital forensic examiners should be familiar with, but there are also some not so typical devices that are starting to come about. There's research being done, and there's training that is starting to be provided in some of these different sections for these devices now. So in your units, you may have a need for being able to do research and actually see if you can get some information off of these devices before it's your first real piece of evidence, that is an Alexa or an Apple Watch or an infotainment system out of a vehicle. So then you go into collection. Now collection here, we're specifically talking about physical devices. So if we've identified a device that we got on scene or from an incident or from a person, we want to seize those devices. That's a physical collection. So most of your normal rules are going to come in play here. You need to document everything, what was done on scene. You have to have a chain of custody. You need to package it properly. It's electronic, so we have to remember that we don't want to use static bags or bags that can develop that static. We don't always use the anti-static bags. And then in transportation, we want to make sure we don't put it in our vehicles and then leave it in the hot sun or leave it in the freezing cold or any place that it can get moisture, because electronics do not like moisture. The other form of collection that I won't talk about, but is actually the on-scene collection. If you're doing triage and you're developing those methods for being able to collect data from live running machines or from, let's say, RAM, which may not be able to collect later. You may only be able to collect it while you're on scene at that time. So once we've collected that evidence and it makes its way back to the lab, we get it in the lab and we have to start working on it. The first thing that we need to do is we have to attempt to preserve that evidence. Now, before we even start preserving the digital information that's on that evidence, we also have to remember our other disciplines. So if we get evidence in the lab, like a cell phone, that's been utilized by an individual all day, every day, if there's a need to do DNA on that phone, we need to be aware of that. And DNA may need to be swabbed off of that phone before we take that into our lab to start doing digital forensics on it. And as I've shown you a couple slides before this, latent prints is a big field that could come into play depending on the devices that you're getting into analyze. So latent prints, if you go and start working on something even with gloves, you may damage or overprint the actual prints that may exist. When we're talking about digital information, we want to preserve that information as best we can in the state that it was when we received it, when we seized it off of that scene. So there may be some things out of our control here from the electronics point, but as a digital forensic examiner, you have to be aware of this and you have to do the best that you can to preserve that information like it was when you received it. You may also have to interact with the device before you can actually get information off of it, because there is no other way. So the digital forensics examiners need the training to know what's the best way to do it at the time that they have those devices in the lab. So in this case, we're talking about a write blocker. So we use write blockers so that we can prevent the alterations or changes on the digital information on a hard drive. So in this case, we actually have a hard drive hooked up to a write blocker, so we can create that preserved copy, or what we might call a forensic image of that hard drive. This is just a quick visual for taking the ones and zeros off of a hard drive. We'll take those ones and zeros off and we'll put them in forensic evidence files. And these are a couple examples of what the file names might be. Same thing for mobile devices. So for mobile devices, we may have to interact with that device to actually pull the information off of it. Might not be able to use a write protector when we're dealing with mobile devices. So mobile devices will interact with that device and we'll pull off all the ones and zeros that we can. In that process, the visual will look the same. When we're trying to pull the ones and zeros off that device, we'll then put those in forensic evidence files, and then these are some examples of what the files might be named or might look like. Once we have the preservation files or we have those forensic evidence files, they have to go somewhere, right? So we analyze computers with computers. That is no secret, right? We will have a forensic workstation, or we might have multiple forensic workstations in order to analyze that information and get down to what we need to find for that case. So this is just an example of a forensic workstation. We also have a digital evidence server. This can vary across labs. Some labs do not have the resources to buy themselves a server, so they'll have different mechanisms where they'll actually preserve those forensic evidence files in a different way. They may put them on separate hard drives, and they buy hard drives in bulk, and then they file those hard drives off in an evidence room somewhere. You have to do with what's best that you can get for your lab. You have to come up with those procedures and figure out what's the best way for you to go about doing this. So what we'll do is we'll create forensic evidence files, and then we'll back those up to our evidence server. Our working copies will stay on our forensic workstations while we're doing our analysis, and the not working copy, the clean copy, the backup copy will actually be on the server. If it's needed, we can go pull it down from the server later. It is also there for if we get a request from the defense for access to the forensic evidence files, so we can pull that off for them. In our case, we also have a backup server. So the server is our working server that we can access directly, and then the backup server is going to take everything from that working server and put it in a second physically different location in case catastrophe happens. So we're in an area where we have, hurricanes. Some of y'all in different areas have different things y'all have to worry about. For hurricanes, for us, right, we could have a whole building or half of a building go underwater, and that would not be good if it was your server. So we have to have it in two different places. So once we preserve it, right, we've gotten all of that information off of the devices. Ideally, we work from a working copy. Right? In some cases you can't, but that's actually more rare. So we work from that working copy of what we preserved. We have to start analyzing that information. How are we going to do that? Right? Well, we're going to take our forensic software, which we'd also call our tools, and training and the expertise to examine the digital information. One of the biggest things here is you'll hear some people talk about digital forensics, and they will say, okay, just pull the information out the phone, throw it through the tool, and whatever it pushes out after that, we're good to go. It's been analyzed. The tool did the analysis for us. That is incorrect. The tool does not do the analysis for you. The tool also does not verify your results. And in our field, we have to verify our results. So during that review phase, so we start analyzing some information, and we get somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 50,000 graphics and 10,000 videos and 100,000 documents, and we need to start reviewing that information. But really, as an analyst, how far are we involved in the case? Do you actually know who the suspect is, who the victim is? Did you do any interviews with those people? Probably not. In our scenario here at JPSO, we are not doing those interviews. So we don't know the intimate details of the case. So we need to communicate that with the requester or the detective and talk to them about that. They may have the need or the intimate knowledge to go through that information and actually find things that are pertinent for their case. So we're starting to figure out how we can get them to review some of that information for their case and then communicate back and forth with them to ultimately have a forensic analysis report of the information that was located during your analysis. So for our review, we were doing disks for a long time. We are still doing disks because basically they are a very easy way to archive. You buy decent quality and they can last for years and years at a controlled atmosphere. One of the biggest problems with disks is generating these really large review packets or reports. They will not fit on one disk. They will sometimes take up 30, 40, 50 DVDs. That can be a huge headache when you take 50 DVDs and you try to review those on the detective side or the requester side. So we had to start thinking of some other ways to do this. One of the easiest ways was to start using external USB drives. So we figured out that we could use USB drives that are of a larger capacity to start enabling the creation of reviewing packets or reviewing reports so that they could come look at those packets on their laptop. Also, during this, we were finding that there were limitations there also, but it's a necessity. So we will create reports that will get filed as evidence, all right, because they won't fit on a couple disks. We also have determined that through that review process, what if you need to give it to somebody else to review outside of your agency? So now it's outside of your control or your normal chain of custody. So there are ways of doing that, and you can still have you can still not worry about the liability so much. So if you use an external hard drive that's FIPS compliant, right, it'll be encrypted at rest on the drive, and they will have to have the actual code to get into it and be able to see the data. So if something were to happen to that drive, it gets misplaced or something like that, you would not have to worry about the data becoming determined or recovered by somebody that wasn't supposed to see it. So if you could get with your DA's office, for example, we're working towards this right now, and getting some of these drives so that if our DA's office needs to look at a huge reviewing packet or report, they'll be able to check these drives out from us. Also for reviewing, with the USB drives and the external hard drives, we were seeing some limitations there. So we had to brainstorm a little bit and try to come up with ideas of how else can we come to this solution to where they can get access to this data but it still be controlled. So one of the ways that we came up with was providing virtual machines. So we actually were able to stand up virtual machines, and we have control of the virtual machines. They're not out on the internet, right? They're on an internal network, and they're secured as much as they can be secured so that they can access the data just like if they were to come pick up a USB drive from you. They would still have access to that data. They would bring it back to their laptop, and they would be able to plug it in and review the data from their laptop. So they still have access to that information. If we provide the virtual machines to them, we can actually separate them out by multiple virtual machines and multiple users. so that we can assign it to multiple detectives or requesters at one time. We found that this is actually extremely useful, and through the beta testing process, we actually got a lot of positive feedback for this. The other thing we have here is we have our separate IT department, which actually manages all of the laptops that the detectives have, and they're admin locked down, so they can't install any software on there, like a viewer or something like that. So that limits them very, very much to what they can actually plug into their devices and then install to view. So through this process, we don't have to worry about that so much because we control what can be installed on those virtual machines. Also, what this enables us to do is, let's say we have a 120 gig reviewing package that we want to provide for them to look at. We'd have to get a very large USB, or we could just place it in a folder in the virtual machine and they can open it up that way. Also, with multiple devices. So let's say I have, which is more common, you have three phones on one case, you have two laptops, and you have a tablet. And you do analysis on all of those devices. Now you have multiple large reviewing. So with the virtual machines, we have found a lot of positive feedback from the detectives on this. Now that's not the end result. That's not, hey, we throw it in a virtual machine and then everything is over with. That begins that two-way of communication. So the detectives will go review some of that information, and they will find all this great information for their case. Oh, look, this graphic is going to be perfect. This text message is going to be good. You know, this email history is going to prove something for me. I need to document this in some way, and I need to communicate that back to the analyst. And then we will, from the digital forensic side, we'll go into that virtual machine, take a look at their notes, and we'll continue finalizing and creating and generating that digital forensic report that will ultimately file on some media, and it'll end up being an entry line for evidence. It'll get a chain of custody and all those good things for court later. So the report's the most important thing. You will come up with various ways of doing this. I have seen colleagues that do this in a variety of ways. Some people keep it extremely simple. Some people will create huge, long, elaborate reports. You got to figure out what's best for how you are going to do your things and make sure that you can provide the information in your report or your test results as needed. I can't get too far into that because there's a lot of variables there. So it depends on what kind of case it is, depends on what the needs are for the case, and it depends on what kind of media you're actually going to put your reports into, how you're going to package them up, and things like that. So we're going to touch on some concepts. I think we're doing pretty good on time. So we're going to touch on some concepts within digital forensics. Some of them may be familiar, some of them may not have. But CSI versus reality is going to be a common one for most people that are sitting in this. We are absolutely not CSI Cyber, right? That is an entertainment show. Encryption has become a very big issue more recently. For the mere fact that the users are getting devices that are coming with default encryption on them. They are not seeking out and doing research to find out how to encrypt their devices. They are buying them from the store, and they are encrypted right when they get them out of the package. And then ultimately, we will analyze those devices one day, and that could pose a problem for us. It can cause dilemmas, and it could possibly stop us in our tracks. The demand and volume are two of the hugest things, right? Over the years that I've been doing this, I actually started doing this in 2003. The demand is just through the roof, and the volume has basically times 10. So whereas, the larger hard drives when I started were like 80 gigs, the larger hard drives now are like 8 terabytes. So we're talking about extreme changes in the volume of data that you are possibly able to get when somebody gets a device seized and needs to be analyzed. So this is an iPhone report that the DA's office had to print out. This is actually an 8 gig iPhone report, and it wasn't even a full phone. So we like to show this picture because we like to tell our DAs not to print the reports that we give them on the disk. And they like to print them because they had to for court. So There's an example of making life a little more difficult for yourself. So in the digital realm, right, we are not trying to create things that are going to be printed out for obvious reasons. We can't go through this data as it's printed out like we can go through the data which would be in a digital format, like a PDF file, or using one of the tools or reviewing packages that we have available to us. So real quick on volume. This is just a nice slide I've seen for years and years. I use it in a lot of my presentations. This volume we're going to talk about is smaller than your phone. So for most of you out there that have a smartphone in your pocket right now or using this, your phone has probably got more storage than the volume we're talking about right here. We're going to talk about a 12 gigabyte volume. So there's a lot of math here. We're not going to go through it line for line. The gist here is if you were to create a Word document that was about 4 million pages long and hit print on it and actually be able to print all of that paper somewhere and stack it on top of itself, it would be about the size or as tall as the Sears Tower in Chicago. Hopefully, if anybody's Chicago here, I got the height on that right. But it's about as tall as the Sears Tower in Chicago. So that would kind of give you a visual of the amount of data that we go through on one device. So we get those multiple devices in, or we get those devices that have 3, 4, 5, 10 times the amount of volume we're talking about here. Your digital forensic analysts are going through a lot of data on a day-to-day basis with every case. So since we get so many phones requested and there's so much volume coming through, one of the ways we've tried to combat that is with mobile device kiosks. So you can get mobile device kiosks and you can train some of your detectives to be certified operators. This does not mean they're digital forensic analysts. It doesn't mean they're going to go analyze that data and be able to testify as an expert in court. But what we've done here is we've actually created a one-day course that they will sit through, and we will teach them how to do this and get the low-hanging fruit from those mobile devices. So it's a very limited amount of data that they can get, and they are taught in class to understand that they're only going to get that limited amount of data. So far, we've trained 38 individuals as operators in our bureau. This is a quick view of what it looks like. Really, it's nothing but an all-in-one computer here, and down here is a proprietary for the connections for the mobile devices. So one of the things as a unit you would definitely want to start doing is providing resources or getting involved, right? So in one of the ways we get involved is we work with our DA's office a lot for trial prep and trial. We use any of the resources and knowledge we have to try and help them help us and vice versa. So we'll do a lot of, well, how can I show this? Or, well, let's go through, possibility of questions you might get, and then actually qualifying as an expert on the stand. We also do an internal website where we will provide resources for our detectives. So we can put up anything there, like a go-by for search warrants, any of these great PDFs that are sent around the different digital forensic communities that are great shortcuts or cheats, or how to identify models of phones and things like that. We can provide that through our internal website. We also have all of our requests up here. So just like you have your requests coming into your lab, it's all digital for us, so they can send those emails in directly from that site. Finally, I'm going to touch real quick on analysts. So if you are at a lab that has digital forensics unit, or if you're trying to stir up a digital forensics unit, the analysts that you will try to bring on board, or if you're just a single individual that's trying to show the person above you, I'm an analyst, I need certain things, I have to spend money, I know we have a budget, but I'm trying, please, please, please. One of the biggest ways to talk about this that I found extremely efficient is the tool belt analogy. So if I'm a master carpenter, or I'm a carpenter and I'm coming to do work in your lab, or you're trying to hire me in your lab or make me better, would you want a carpenter to walk in and have an empty tool belt, or to have a tool belt with one hammer on it? Okay? So I know examiners in certain places that they're fighting for funds, they're fighting for renewals and licenses to keep one tool. And what I mean by that is one piece of software. Right? In our field, it should look more like this. Your tool belt should have so many tools in it that it can't even fit in your tool belt. Right? It's a little difficult to understand this concept when you're not doing digital forensics. But for a digital forensic analyst, they need as many tools as you can give them, as you can provide them. They need multiple tools for a couple reasons. One is it makes them much more effective at what they do. Okay? It also enables them to verify their results, which is extremely important in this field. So if you have one tool that's finding that golden egg for your case, and you now need to verify that result, how are you going to do it? Right? The interpretation and processing of the information is also what those tools are going to do. No tool does it all. Some tools do A and Z processing much better than C and D. So I need this tool for that, and I need that tool for that. What makes them a great analyst is to be able to use those tools and know which ones to use when they need to use them. Last thing is try to be proficient in one aspect. So like Chief talked about a few minutes ago, being proficient in one aspect we found here is much more effective than trying to spread it out amongst all possible subjects. So you take one person and you try to make them very good at mobile device analysis and then build from there, or then move them to another topic. You don't take somebody and say, hey, I need you to learn mobile phones and I need you to learn video analysis, enhancement and collection, and computers all at the same time. So that's just our personal opinion, and that's the last note that I will end on. And that's my last slide. Thank y'all for having me. This has been great. Hope I've been helpful, piqued somebody's interest, or taught them something today. And I think they'll open it up for questions now.
Great. Thanks a lot, Steve and Tim. I am going to go ahead and open up Q&A. We actually have some time this morning, so we can go and answer all the questions that we need to today. So I'm going to start with a couple of the first ones that were came up during Tim's talk. And it says, Tim, you mentioned issues with regards to civilian personnel. What issues would civilian personnel have with analyzing child pornography cases?
All right, I'll jump in on that. So the issues with analyzing child exploitation cases, they absolutely exist. I have heard from other labs that they have been able to go through the process of getting civilians to do that role. They have to come up with some pretty good procedures and policies for that. I can't speak directly for how we do it here because we do not do that here. We don't have civilian personnel that is accessing the child pornography exploitation stuff.
And just to jump in, some states have weird laws regarding who can look at child pornography, who can, quote, reproduce it by making reports and things like that. So it's just something to be aware of depending on which state you're in, what kind of quirky laws you may have.
Okay, thank you. This is Chris Dieters, by the way. Welcome everybody listening in. Our laboratory, we do have kind of a hybrid unit that's located in our investigations unit, but it is part of under the umbrella of our accreditation, and we have civilians. But one of the things that we do have in place, and this is maybe not quite what you guys were thinking of, but I think it's another issue, is we have, for both the agents and for sworn and civilian, is we have a psychologist on staff in terms of like a contract psychologist that is available to the employees, throughout the workday. So different issue, but one that I think also gets, has to be considered when you're bringing in personnel for that type of work. So the next question is, organizing or unlocking the data considered analysis, and is that something that would fall under accreditation guidelines?
Go ahead. So obviously, depending on if you're looking at 2017, anytime you touch or work on a device, you have to notify your customer. As far as that's not analysis, but it is some kind of testing, I guess, that is performed on it. So we have constant communication with our customers, so they are being notified, and we track those notifications. So it's not the complete analysis, but we're beginning the testing process. As soon as we touch that computer, we're beginning that testing process, so that's when the documentation starts.
Okay, and what is your lab's policy on, and the term he used was rooting, R-O-O-T-I-N, a phone in order to perform a physical extraction?
All right, so we don't have a policy that addresses in black and white the routing of a phone. That's going to be considered a specific task, right? So we're not going to necessarily address it as, oh, we route it because of this, or we can route it because of this. But in any situation, if we're trying to get the information off of a device, we're going to use forensically accepted methods or best practices for doing so. So if that is an accepted practice in our field, is absolutely something that we will do.
And is anyone using AWS for storage?
We are not. I do not know of anybody directly that is. So the only issue that you may have with an idea like that is the control and security of your information. So I think what they're getting at here is trying to take advantage of a resource that a company can provide, like Amazon, that you can't provide in-house. So that is it's a great idea. The problem you will have is how in control of that data are you, and is the security there that you can prove or may need to prove on the stand at any time when you talk about that information.
And just to jump in to help answer too is we have a lot of these solutions out there now, and some are cost effective. It would just be like considered off-site storage of your evidence. The more removed you become from immediate control, the more questions for chain of custody and things like that. So those solutions are out there, and there are some companies who are dedicated just to law enforcement. But again, the further you remove yourself from the storage process, the more questions you have. Exactly, just like if you moved your drug vault to a self-storage place somewhere, you're going to have some issues. So that's what I'd add to it.
Okay, the next question is, what digital evidence case management system software are people using? And I'll just go ahead and answer for Minnesota, and that is that we are using, for both our digital evidence as well as the rest of the laboratory, the Porterly system Beast.
Okay.
Jefferson
we are currently, yep, sorry. We are currently using Justice Tracks. So that was already implemented here when the Digital Forensics Unit was stood up. So we absolutely just fell in line with using it. This person may be getting at the fact that there are some specific digital evidence software suites out there for doing the management and things like that. I cannot speak on anybody that I know directly that has given me feedback that I can share here today, but I know they do exist.
Okay, and have you ever found drug-related photos or overdose victims with needles or drugs present?
Yes.
Have you ever?
Is that something that you usually handle with like a death investigation case, or is it more with a drug controlled substance type investigation?
So obviously, if we have that, it depends on your laws in your state. You could use that to prosecute for homicides if you can track back the drugs to that overdose, and it's more of a legal discussion. But we, as Steve showed, we really do use the photographs on phones constantly. We are lucky that our jurisdiction, that our murderers use their cell phones like 16-year-old girls. So we tend to get a lot of pictures and things off of them that tend to be valuable in court.
Once data is extracted from whatever electronic device is used in the crime, such as a mobile phone, what happens to those devices? Are they recycled, wiped, and returned to the suspect, victim, manufacturer?
So here, if they are treated as evidence, they're going to be stored as evidence until the case may be adjudicated. There are special situations where it might be different than that. So if you have an actual victim or a witness, we have certain things in place. I'll let Tim jump in on that in reference to the special thing we do for victims and witnesses.
So it's a delicate topic because now some kid gets sent a picture on their phone. Now it becomes evidence and potentially has contraband on it. We have a whole legal documentation process. We try to discourage giving the phones back, but if we do have to give it back, there's a huge disclaimer they have to sign off on, because the worst case scenario is you give the phone back to that kid, they inadvertently back up from the cloud, and then the picture's there again, and the parents think you gave the phone back with the picture on it. So we have a lot of legal language in our disclaimers saying it's not erased. Stuff may exist. I mean, I could get you more language, but we cover ourselves 10 ways over, and we try not to give it back whenever possible.
Okay, what are the challenges and costs to lab accreditation?
So our digital forensics unit is going through the accreditation process right now. The costs are, it's like anything else in forensic science. Is a lot more people touching a case. You have technical review. You have just a lot more policies, procedures, a lot more report writing. Like I said, anytime you touch a case now, you have to write a report, especially under 2017. I would highly recommend looking at the different types of accreditation to see what best fits your lab. Obviously, there's ISO 17025 that most crime labs fall under, but a lot of digital forensics laboratories are moving to ISO 17020. It's a little bit less analytically based. So it's like everything else in a crime lab. It was way better and cheaper when we could just fly, like the Wild West, but with accreditation does come expense, but it also comes quality, so I think it's a balance.
And I'll just jump in a minute with that, and that is it's also dependent upon your state's laws. We have a law in Minnesota that if we're rendering an opinion, an expert opinion, we have to be accredited. And so that's in part why we rolled our digital evidence unit into our laboratory. So it really depends on each state as well in terms of what do they consider, where do they consider this to be falling under, and do they have special requirements with regards to lab accreditation?
That's a great point, Chris. Thanks. Yeah, really check what your state wants to do. I think ultimately everybody should be accredited. It just makes us better. But if you're a small one-person shop, or if you have other issues, it does make it more difficult. And there's places to reach out, and there's other people who've successfully done it. And Steve and I are more than willing to point you in the right direction if you're willing to do that in the future.
Okay, are the backup copies of the digital evidence that's transferred to the off-site backup servers stored indefinitely?
Short answer is no. We have been fortunate enough to be able to buy large enough capacity servers for what we are storing currently, but I'm actually in the process of creating a procedure for removing that digital evidence. So yeah, it's interesting to think about this because the physical evidence is it's tangible, right? We can say, okay, we have drugs that need to be destroyed. We come up with a process for doing that, and 10-year-old drugs will then put through this process, and all of these cases can be destroyed this year. It's going to be the same thing on the digital side. It's just a little different to conceptualize because you can't touch anything. It's not tangible. Essentially, all we're hitting is delete. But we cannot just go delete that because of the case may or may not be adjudicated. So we will have to figure out a process for determining whether that case is adjudicated and if it could ever be needed again. And if it is okayed by everybody and all parties involved, then we would go through the process of getting rid of it, just like you would physical evidence.
Okay, do you two have any suggestions regarding what a police department can do to exploit cell phone information for lead purposes without initially submitting the device to a laboratory? Example, recover phone and need to identify most recent calls or look at contact list. Simple things that are crucial to the investigation and needed fast.
So what we've done in our lab, as Steve already talked about, are the kiosks. They're not cheap. I can't remember exactly how much it costs, but it's a great solution to 10. they're $10,000, but there's different solutions out there. I will tell you that our virtual our kiosk, basically they get the information looking for: text messages, call logs, phone records, things like that. Anything bigger than that, they'll send to the lab. That's when I said technician versus analyst. But most detectives with the proper training, what we've decided to do is not only, I'm not going to mention the actual machine, but we train them on the device, but as part of that, they go through crime lab training and become authorized by the digital forensics unit training, and authorized as members to use that machine. So they have to not only follow the rules for the terminal itself, they have to follow the rules that we put in place. And anybody who doesn't follow those rules, we kick out. So they fall under our umbrella of protection with that training. I would not just plug and play this in a detective bureau and have everybody use it. It's a recipe for disaster. And then what happens is they'll start comparing the detective, what he did on that kiosk, to what a digital forensic analyst may have done in the lab. So you want to have very clearly defined roles, but it's a good way to do it. And there's a lot of systems out there varying in price that will allow you to do different things with the phones.
Okay, since organizing or unlocking isn't analysis, would you please give us examples of what you would consider to be analysis?
Well, so like Tim talked about briefly, as soon as we start interacting with that device, it's going to fall under the umbrella of analysis. So I wouldn't necessarily say that unlocking isn't considered analysis. It's going to be part of that process, right? Now, when you get down to are you analyzing information at that time? No, you're not analyzing information. But in order to preserve the information off of that device so that you can do analysis, right, you're going to have to interact with it, which may be unlocking that device.
And think of it from like a lab standpoint. You are using your expertise, training, and instrumentation to perform something on that piece of evidence. So for that reason, it is some form of analysis.
How are passwords being reported out? Example, are they put in official reports, or is there other subtype of memorandum?
No, not unless they're needed for the actual forensic report.
So we utilize the information but not report it out, is what you're saying? Like, my guess is we utilize the information if there's passwords, but we don't include those in the report. We say go ahead, I'm sorry.
Right. Unless the password is going to be relevant to the forensic report, we would not include it in that report. Now, with our parsed out data that we have from doing those examinations, we may recover or decode or decrypt some kind of password or password container. There are a lot of variables here, but if you get the passwords from somewhere, and that will enable you to go further in your parsing out of information. So if that helps you decrypt a volume or a special container or a zipped file that's been password protected, then you will utilize that password to get into that information and continue with your analysis and get the most out of that information that you have from that digital device and use it for the case at hand and what the requestor has asked for or asked, related to that criminal case.
Okay, and so do you have a time limit and how long you'll try and crack into a phone? For example, months?
We do not have a time limit currently. We currently, and I know where this question is probably coming from, so I'll speak about it, but I won't give details. We currently have devices that may or may not be possibly running for the next 20 years until they become cracked. So speaking on that topic, you have to determine what your resources are. So if you have the resources to have a password cracking tool, which may be a mixture of hardware and software, and you have room, physical room, like room in your lab or a separate room that you can designate to this, you can actually start the password cracking process and leave it go for many, many days, years to come. Right? And then you have to also figure out, is this case at that higher threshold, however you determine that in your department, right? So is it a case like a homicide that you definitely want to leave this potential cracking to run for the next 10 to 15 years. Is the trial going to come up? Is the trial already going to be completed by the time it cracks? There are a lot of variables with that, but you have to figure out what's best for you and what you're actually going to work for and towards to do that.
And then the legal disclosures that go with that, you may be going to trial on a phone that has the potential to be broken into, but you have to go past that. You just have to disclose to the defense, to the jury, yes, the phone's still being broke, but it says 20 years from now, and you just got to make sure you're upfront open. But we will let it run as long as we can.
Okay, we're nearing the end of our talk today. We have two more questions that we're going to handle. But if anybody else has questions that come up or would like to have some resources, Tim, Steve, and I have put our email into the chat pod. And the next to the last question is, our search warrants covering information from the cloud associated with the phone, as well as physical contents needed?
Okay, so I can definitely talk about this for a minute or two. Our search warrants, we do not actually deploy those search warrants. Just so you know, here, we don't do that. The detectives do that. But in reference to the search warrants here, the cloud that we're talking about, that offsite storage that may be utilized by that mobile device, is going to be considered a separate device or a separate location. So in that sense, like most search warrants, if you have the need to go to a separate location, you're going to have to get an additional search warrant. So unless it's covered, both locations are covered under that search warrant, and that's accepted by your judges and signed, you will have to get a separate one for that. Because that information, ultimately, it's not stored on the device you've seized, right? So if you take that information off the device, you're not going to get the cloud data that's stored up in Amazon or Google or Apple server somewhere that's attached to an account. You need to actually get a search warrant, go to those providers, and request that information.
Just one thing for your detectives, make sure when they have a phone like that or information, they do a preservation order. So most major entities like Facebook or Instagram or places Steve mentioned, they have a mechanism to preserve. It'll stop the person from deleting the information while they're trying to obtain a warrant. So a preservation order probably requires less probable cause, right?
Yeah, it's less.
It's way less. It's just, can you preserve this? We're going to go get a warrant. A lot of detectives forget to do that, and by the time they go around and get in the search warrant, it's amazing that all of the pictures of the guy snorting coke are gone. So you want to make sure that they do preservation orders.
Okay, and last question. Using a NAS server for data, is restricted access folders accepted as secured storage for images, or is there concern about the NAS administrator being able to access data if desired?
Okay, so I have a feeling I know why they're asking this question. The access to your evidence may have to be disclosed later in court, and I think that's what they're getting at. So if you do not administer your NAS, you have the potential for anybody that has access to that NAS to be called into court. So I don't think it would be accepted for just having restricted access folders, because the NAS administrator would ultimately have access to everything that's under there. So I can only speak specifically from here. We have a completely separate system than our IT department, right? Our stuff is not connected to theirs, and their stuff is not connected to ours. Right? We have our own forensic network, so that if needed to be disclosed later in court, our examiners and analysts are the only people that had access to that network and potentially the additional evidence that's located there. Hopefully I answered that well for them.
And if you are stuck in a situation where you have an IT department with a NAS administrator, at a minimum, I would make sure that person has documented training on how to handle digital evidence by your digital forensics unit. Ideally, you'd want it partitioned off where they don't have access, just like your cleaning crew can't go into your evidence vault without being escorted. You shouldn't have your NAS administrator going into your, quote, computer evidence vault without being escorted. So at the very least, I would say they need training if you can't keep it separate.
All right, that is the end of our questions for today. We are going to go ahead and move into our closing. The first thing I would like to obviously do is to thank Tim and Stephen for their presentation and all of the hard work that they've done in the digital forensics field. This was a fantastic presentation, a great addition to the ASCLD webinar series. So thank you both very much for taking the time with us today. Just so everyone, all of our audience knows, both
welcome.
Tim and Stephen did put their email addresses in the chat pod, so if you need to scroll up a little bit to find that, be sure to take that down just in case you do have any follow-up questions for them. We also, as always, like to thank our audience for joining us today. Without your participation and support, these webinars are simply not possible, so thank you for coming in and watching today's webinar. You will see there in the middle of your screen a short customer satisfaction survey. So if you wouldn't mind clicking on the word here, that'll open up a new window for you, and you can run through that quick survey. Your feedback to our webinars is always vital information that we try to use to make sure that we always provide you the best webinar experience, and also to adjust any content and the way we disseminate that information out to you, our audience. Also, we do have in the bottom left-hand corner our file share pod. This does have a copy of today's slide deck. It is a PDF version, so if you click on the file name and then click the download files button directly below that, you will be able to download a copy of today's slide deck directly from the room before you leave. You will also see there in the chat pod, Tyler has started putting in our social media outlets as well as our website and our podcast. So be sure to check us out on all of our social media outlets. Definitely start listening to our podcast. They are great outlets of information. And we also did record this webinar. We will be converting it into our archival version here in the next few days. You should get an email since you did attend today's webinar that it is ready, and you'll be able to register for that or pass along to any colleagues that you feel would benefit from today's talk. As always, if you did watch today's webinar as a group, please reach out to us to our email address that you'll find up there in the welcome notes section, and send us an email with everyone's name and email addresses so we can make sure everyone gets credit. Again, thank you so much for for your attendance today. Thank you to our subject matter experts, and we hope to see everyone on our next webinar in the series that will be on fire debris analysis, and that should be next week. So make sure to check out our website for that. Again, thank you everyone for attending, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon.